right. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Maddalena. I'm a pen tester for eCentire, and I don't really like doing lengthy introductions for talks, so just a few key facts for you to know for this talk. If you're interested in some of the stuff I talk about today, you can find my GitHub at just /Chris Maddalena, and I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if you want to get a hold of me, tweeting me on Twitter is a pretty good way to go about doing that, so it's just @CMaddalena. And just a quick plug for MySec. You're probably might be familiar with MySec since you're here at Converge in B-Sides Detroit. If not, know that we have meetups in Southfield. We also have meetups in Jackson. So if you're from the area, it's totally worth coming out, hang out with the community here in Michigan. And we do have really great talks once a month at both locations. They're often different, so we're often putting out 2 different talks every month. And we do post those. We actually live stream them, and we'll post them on the MySec Group YouTube channel. So a lot of times these are talks that might be at other conferences that they're not recorded, or they actually never end up at a conference. We do a lot of lightning talks, a lot of new presenters, students that give talks to kind of work on their presenting skills. So there's a lot of really cool stuff there that doesn't actually make it out to these conferences, so check it out. So quick agenda items for this talk. I want to talk about how you can create your own tools and try to encourage you to kind of, get your hands dirty, a little bit of do-it-yourself business. And we're going to talk about, making sure you understand code before you run it. And we'll talk about why, if that's an unfamiliar concept. And also just making sure you're not reinventing the wheel. You're actually improving and enhancing stuff that already exists and working with other developers on their tools that already exist that you can work on as well. And then also working on making your own toolkit and actually assembling your own toolkit that you use for automation or things at your job. So the first step when you're going to make a tool or when you're trying to work with a new tool is understanding how that tool works. This applies to everything. It applies to an interpreter and Nmap, things you might use every day. And I know there's a lot of blue team people here. A lot of my examples will be red team focused because that's what I use every day. But this applies to blue team tools too. So one thing you want to be familiar with is just looking through the code. You don't have to be really familiar with what every function does. Just be able to start digging in and begin to understand what it's trying to do. Because sometimes you'll find a tool that says it does one thing, it appears to do it, but it just doesn't do it right. So it might end up being unreliable. If you can understand the tool, you can understand how it might break and how it actually works. And for example, in this example, we have some proof of concept exploit code. This is actually from 2012, and a friend of mine, actually several people that I've shown this slide to who are familiar with this rule of always making sure I understand the code, immediately started pointing out, hey, that's not shell code. There's a bunch of spaces in there. This is just ASCII text. Well, they're right. If you actually were to print that out in ASCII, it's a nasty command to try to delete whatever your root drive is on your computer. So if you're on the red team and you're working with proof of concept code, know that sometimes this gets snuck in there and it's not friendly. But also there might be tools that don't intend to be unfriendly that can just do bad stuff. So we want to make sure that we understand the code from a security standpoint and also so that we know what it's actually doing on our system. The second guideline is actually improving and fixing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So this is a really great way to avoid reproducing effort that's already been done and maybe done better than you can. But also it's great for learning. So take a tool that you already use, dig through the code, understand it, and if it's not doing something that you like or it's not doing it in quite the right way for what you need, you can probably make modifications to it. You can add an option. And you don't need to immediately jump into, if you take sort of a house renovation as an example, you don't need to jump into building a whole wing onto the house or a garage in the backyard. You can hang a poster. You can do little things to it to improve it and make it so you like it and so that you use it and it works the way you like. And one of the really great things about doing this is we can then submit our changes back to the projects. And especially in the InfoSec community, we have an embarrassment of riches in open source software. There's so much out there on GitHub. The stuff you use every day, like the social engineering toolkit or Nmap, there's this code that is out there that you can look at. It might be beyond you right now, but eventually it might not be. Or there might be code that your friends, coworkers, other people in the community work on. Like I'm going to show you some code today. It's not perfect, but it's tools I'm going to put out there for you to take a look at. And you might have ideas on how to improve it. You might know how to do something better than I do, and you can contribute back to my project, just like you can contribute back to any other project you find on GitHub or you hear about on Twitter or at a conference. So number 3, actually making your own toolkit. Eventually get to the point where you're comfortable automating things. You're comfortable actually building out a tool. And this is a really great skill to possess. Because if you think about it, you might periodically see a task you don't want to do. Maybe every Friday you have to do something that takes you like 45 minutes. Or once a month you have to log into every system and install this update or make some change. And you look at it and you think, well, I could automate that, but for me to figure out how to automate it and actually implement it and test it, it's going to be like 2 hours. Maybe it'll take me an entire day, depending on your skill level and understanding. It sounds like a terrible way to spend the day when it's just going to take you 45 minutes to do it manually. But if you think about the way to do it correctly, is actually spend the time, learn how to do it. And then once you've actually implemented it, maybe it takes you an entire day for that 45 minutes time saving, but it's now time you save every week or every month. It's going to pay dividends in the end, and you're going to learn a lot while you do it. And of course, so your reward is you have a better understanding of the tools you use, you have a better understanding of how those tools break, how they can break, why they're breaking. You might actually start to understand the stack traces that you see get spit out, if there's no error handling. And you'll end up learning more about important programming languages that, and what's important to you will change depending on what you do. That might be Python. If you're in the InfoSec community, it probably is Python. There's a lot out there written in that language. But there's Ruby, there's C, there's Go. You can kind of pick your language, what you're interested in, and you can find a project in that language, I guarantee it. So to get started, you can start off really small. You don't have to jump right into the deep end with a big project. You don't have to dive into something like an interpreter and try to understand that. That's unnecessary. You can actually just take a simple tool that you like that requires maybe a little bit of error handling or better user feedback, and I'll actually give an example of this in a minute of how I did it. But you can start adding little things that actually really help out that tool, even though it's a small addition in the grand scheme of things. It really helps out that project, and you get to learn along the way. And as part of that, you can start to learn about Git and GitHub and how that works. It's not as confusing as it looks up front. There's a lot of weird Git commands that look crazy at the start, but really there's only a few commands that you need to know to get started, and you can start cloning repositories and editing code and pushing it back up to GitHub without that much difficulty. And one of the things I want to point out, and actually I was talking to Ben 10 about this last night, and he mentioned that it's a really important idea to stress. You don't have to be afraid of even things like the 4 Kids books. Like No Starches Python for Kids is actually a really great book. It's pretty short. It's pretty easy to reference if you buy the PDF from the website, and you can do a lot of cool stuff that might get you started. That's especially if you have kids that maybe you're interested in learning Python along with them. There's projects in there like off to the right here I have a picture of the turtle, which Python has a turtle module that you can draw stuff on your screen. And you can tell it to go forward, turn 90 degrees to the right, go forward, you can draw a square. And the book will walk you through that, and then it'll challenge you. Say, hey, draw other shapes. Like, you can start going crazy. You can add color. You can do all kinds of stuff that your kid will probably love, and you'll learn a lot along the way of how to write some pretty basic Python. Once you start getting involved with GitHub, and I do encourage you to do so, is you get out there, set up a GitHub account. And you can create your first repo. And a repo is it's a repository. It's a repository for anything. That's why it's called that. It doesn't have to be a repository for this one specific grandiose tool you want to make. It can be just where you stuff all your scripts. You could just call it Chris's scripts, and that's just where you put stuff. It's even a great kind of backup solution. If you're on another computer and go, oh, I have this really great script that does this for me on my other computer, you can just go to GitHub and pull it down. Of course, make sure that when you're throwing stuff up on GitHub, it's not a bunch of automation scripts that have like your hard-coded admin passwords in it or something like that. But you can put whatever you want up there. You can even just make notes. There's plenty of stuff you'll find on GitHub. Some of my favorite repositories I have starred are nothing but just like links that someone has put together of really great blogs or posts referencing a certain topic. So you can put anything there, and you can pull it down and update it and push it back up to GitHub just like code. So even creating notes to yourself for things you want to remember on GitHub and maybe share with other people is a great way just to get started. You can also get started with doing fork repos. So find a tool you like, fork it. It's literally a button click. You now have your own copy of that tool and your own GitHub repo for it, and you can do whatever you want with it. It has no effect on the other project. If that's unclear, you can do anything you want. It will have no effect on the original creator's project. So have at it. If you break something, you can just hard reset the whole thing and start over. And so this is, I just took this from GitHub. If you go to help.github.com, they actually have really great walkthroughs and FAQs to help you get started if any of it's kind of confusing. And take a drink real quick. So at this point, I kind of want to share a story with you. When I got started with GitHub, these are my first 6 pull requests. A friend of mine creates a really cool tool called the Oscar framework. And last year, I decided I want to get better with Python. So he was kind enough to offer to someone else saying like, hey, if you have any comments on my tool, feel free to let me know. I'll give you credit and we'll implement them. And I thought that was neat that he was open to doing that. So I took a look at it and just wanted to learn how he did stuff. And I was playing with it and saw it kept breaking. I kept crashing it. And I realized it was because where it wanted a full URL, I wasn't giving it the HTTP : // which is what Python wants. It wants the full URL. But the tool didn't convey that to me. I didn't know it. And as a result, I was just crashing it and getting a stack trace back. And once I figured it out, I realized, hey, the tool should really probably just tell me that it wants that, and it should have some error handling so it doesn't crash all the way back and I have to go through all these menus again. So I went in there, and I didn't know much about Python at the time, but I had taken many classes on C in school, so I had some idea of how to set up like a try-catch, looked at how that was done in Python, and implemented it. And so it was a very, very small thing that I did to his tool, but it made it so that now when you run it, if you give it the wrong input, it can't hit the internet, so it can't load that page. It doesn't just crash. Now it has proper error handling in it. So again, it wasn't a unique idea. I did really nothing to his overall concept. He still gets full credit for having a really cool tool that he created, but I was able to contribute this small thing that overall made it a nicer tool to use. Now, why I want to bring this up is because I had no idea how to use GitHub. So I tried to understand the command line and basically gave in, submitted to failure and said, I don't understand how to use this. I'm just going to go to GitHub and actually try to edit the code on GitHub and do a pull request that way. Of course, you do that, the code works on my computer. It should work when I edit it in GitHub. That is, if I edit it correctly and I don't forget things like quotation marks. And of course, he accepted it. He goes, hey, 20 minutes later, your code just crashes the tool. Oh my God, okay. So let's try this again. I find the quotation mark. I fix it. Of course, I don't test the code now because I'm flustered. So I don't test it. Another pull request. You fixed it, but here's a new stack trace. You broke it again. It's like, oh my. So now I run it. I see, oh no, I fixed the next syntax error. And then run it again. Oh, there's a third syntax error. I finally get it all fixed, commit it back to my repo, and do the pull request. And it took about 5 pull requests, with 2 being committed back to his project before we actually finally had working error handling in his tool. But what I learned from that was now I actually understood how to use Git. That gave me a reason to actually, figure out why I should do it the correct way. And he was really cool about the whole thing. And at the time, he was just an acquaintance, and we got talking, and we actually became pretty good friends. So it was a great way both to get involved in that project, learn more about Python, learn more about Git, and actually talk to someone that was making cool tools that I liked and used. And what I learned is that it's okay to make mistakes. You may run into someone on GitHub that you try that first pull request maybe, and they just deny it, and there's no comment. Or they say, this is garbage, go away. They're rude, they're a jerk, whatever. They just don't say anything. You never hear back from them. It just sits there untouched. Whatever it may be, they may be busy. They might just not want you committing, stuff to their tool. They might be might be an ego thing. Whatever it is, it's okay. Because you can still fork that project, and it can be yours. And you can do whatever you want to it. It has no effect on their project. They can have no effect on yours. You can just roll with it. And if you want to be part of a project, you don't have to be part of theirs. You'll find another one. And so it's okay to make those mistakes. It's okay if someone gets snippy with you on GitHub or something, because you can just do your own thing. So at this point, I want to show you a tool that I actually made last year here at Converge. That's why I wanted to come back here and talk about it, because while I was recording video last year, I decided to fill my time. Kyle actually had me in the tracks last year. Many of you might have seen me. I was here for like 8 hours a day in track 1 downstairs, sat in that chair all day recording talks. So I was working on phishing campaigns, and I got tired of going and manually collecting this HTML from a website I wanted to clone and fixing it up and adding some stuff that would make it work with eCentire's custom phishing tool. And I realized there was a lot of stuff I could do to make this automated. I don't have to do this by hand. And I can probably do it right here. I think I was actually in a talk about some new Python tool. So I was like, oh, okay, let's give this a shot. And what I came up with was Cooper. I call it Cooper because it's kind of it's a dumb fish in a barrel joke. I like puns. And, like I said, I created it here in about a couple of days. I had it working. It took about 6 months for me to get it where it was actually something I wanted to use every day. But once I got rolling, it was really fun to make. And I started adding all kinds of features to it. So I had it working with websites. Well, now I had emails. I just wanted to be able to take something I was sent to my, some spam I had in my Gmail account or got sent to my Outlook, that I could just grab that and give it the file and have it process the email. So, once you start doing that, you learn that, hey, there's emails that are quoted printable format, base64 encoded. So I had to add, some support for that as well. There's lots of different, CSS and scripting and relative links and stuff on web pages that you need to take care of. So Cooper, I made it so it does all that for me. And then eventually added other things. I realized that if I didn't want to host an image, I could have it embedded into the web page. You can actually embed images that are base64 encoded. So I looked into Python and realized, hey, I can actually just replace all images with base64 encoded versions if I wanted to. So, or, give it any URL and have it change all the URLs in the web page with the URL I give it. And so the reason I did this was because I wanted to better understand how some of the tools that did this, like the Social Engineering Toolkit or GoFish or the others, a lot of times they just do it in the background. You give it a link, you say, I want to clone this web page, it goes and does it. I wanted to understand how they did it. And I wanted to automate a lot of that work that I wasn't having fun doing. And this is a really great way to start off a project, because once you have an idea of what you want, you can work backwards. So look at what matters or what remains the same no matter what you're doing every time. That probably means that can be scripted. Because it probably doesn't mean, if you're taking the same action, it doesn't really take human interaction to figure out what you're doing, then you can script that, or you can script some logic into it so it makes the right choice for you. And then look out there, see if there's someone that's already doing it. If it's specific to your job or new to you, or kind of very, very unique to you, it's probably not going to be in a tool already out there, but something might do something like it. And then now that you know what you want, you can work backwards to figure out what are the steps that you need to get there. And so for me, that meant I looked at the Social Engineering Toolkit, Dave Kennedy's tool, because it did what I wanted. And I played around with SET before, and I knew it cloned web pages. So I looked at that, and I had some people that I talked to at the conference last year say, well, why don't you just use SET? Well, there was a couple of problems with that. It didn't have compatibility with our custom phishing tool, so I was still going to have to go in and manually edit things. And that manual editing is what I wanted to avoid. So I figured I should just probably make my own tool that copies the web pages and makes these changes for me. So for that, I had to go in and actually understand how SET worked. And at the time, I had no idea what this did. It took me, 5 or 10 minutes poking around in, the SRC directory for SET until I finally found my way to web attack web clone cloner.py. Oh, okay, pretty obvious, cloner.py, that sounds right. And I was able to hone in on this one chunk of code that made absolutely no sense to me. I didn't know about string formatting at the time. That's what those %s are. I didn't know what that did, so it was just a bunch of %s, some commands that I kind of recognized. I had no idea how they worked with a %s, what that was doing. What all these parentheses were. I didn't know what subprocess was, but I understood wget. I knew wget, and I understood some of those options for wget. So I figured, okay, Dave Kennedy uses wget. I'll use wget to get started. And this was basically what I got started with was, code. I just looked for wget, and if it wasn't there, it would use URLlib. So what SET did. So that's what I started with. But one thing that I didn't like was, at the time I used a Windows laptop, and I wanted this to be able to run on Windows. And I had wget, but SET's code specifically looked for 4 or 5 locations that you would find wget on a Linux operating system. So it would always fail that first check and go to URLlib. So I wanted to see if I could make it so that it could find wget if it was on my Windows system. So I came up, I had to do some research, and I came up with those couple of lines up top. And I took a bunch of checks, these like 4 or 5 checks that Set was doing, and condensed them into one command. And I was pretty happy that it worked, and that became the core of what Cooper started out as. And I started adding things, like I already talked about, like decoding emails. And this is one thing I wanted to call out because I was talking to someone, I showed them this code, and it's really basic. If you understand it, and if you've ever had to decode base64 or anything like that, it's just a Python library. I'm just saying decode this string. That's it. So it doesn't really require this, but I added this to Cooper so that I didn't have to do it before I gave the website or the email to Cooper. But what someone pointed out to me is they said, Chris, this doesn't look like it's going to work if you have a multi-part MIME email because you'll have multiple chunks of base64 and ASCII text mixed in. But if you feed that to the just base64 decode, it'll bomb out because it's not all base64. And that's true. So you have to clean up your code, like I actually say, warning, your output might be messy, so double check and make sure you just have base64 in there. And they pointed out that there's a Python library or module that will actually parse through a multi-part message and decode each chunk individually for me, so you don't have to clean it up at all. And that sounds awesome. I don't really have the time right now to look into that. I plan to, it's on my list, but that's throwing it out there as something you could look into that might be pretty basic, that you could go in and edit this function here and submit it back to Cooper. And I would be more than happy to work on that with you or talk about it. So there's always stuff that we can add, modify and change. So just to have a quick demo. Mostly it's just a couple of screenshots because I didn't want to rely on the internet connection here. But I'll show you some sample output. This is basically what it'll look like if you run Cooper. It's really easy. Give it a P to say it's a fish gate for a website. I chose Zoop.com. The restaurant. I chose their website. -U says I want you to replace links. I want you to complete links with Zoop.com and output it as Zoop. It'll go through, spit it out, and this is what we get. It looks pretty similar. It's almost a perfect copy, except the only thing you might notice is that I don't have the font that Zoop uses, so the locations and daily menu buttons don't have the right font. But that's all stuff that's pretty easy to fix afterwards, and it might even be possible to fix that before it's output. I just don't know how to do it yet. But for now, it grabs everything, grabs the styling, everything that you would want, and spits it out perfectly. I'll show you a couple of other examples that I made earlier. Oops. I guess we'll gotta bring it up to that screen. Where is it? There it is. So, for example, if we want Twitter, I just gave it Twitter, and this is what it spits out. Everything it looks perfect. And what Cooper has already done is it's even gone through and it's made the form action. I've just replaced it with, link.fishgate as a sample. And so right there, it would send it to, back to my server if I was trying to, steal Twitter credentials. Everything works. It looks just like Twitter. Did the same thing with Facebook. So it's very easy, especially since what we're often working with is, oh my gosh, my mouse back. So what we're often working with are login pages, things like that you might use for phishing. So Cooper is really good, it turns out, at grabbing those really simple pages. And it made my life a lot easier. And at the end, I learned a lot more about Python. I had to try a lot of different things. I tried URLlib, requests. I tried web scraping with Mechanize. I learned a lot with Beautiful Soup. So I had to work through a lot of different ideas. There was a lot of code that was added to Cooper and then removed and replaced and sometimes added back differently. So you learn a lot when you're trying these projects. So you try a lot of different things. But also, this was my first project where I actually created a GitHub repo and started committing things to GitHub. And that was how I backed up my code. I committed things back to GitHub, and I had team members start using it and, testing it, giving me feedback. And I learned a lot just from the troubleshooting. When something would break, at one point, a few months ago, I decided why not? I'm going to upgrade, I'm going to switch this over to Python 3 and just see what happens. That caused so many headaches. It was actually super easy, but then I'm going through like, yeah, this works. I did it in a weekend. This is Python 3 now. And then actually just last night I fixed, I think, the last bug from Python 3 where something wasn't working and I noticed that I needed to convert something from bytes. And it was very interesting. I learned a lot about the difference between Python 3 and 2.7 when I did that. So I'm still working on Cooper. It's still something that teaches me every time I make changes to it. And that Be Social bit I talked about earlier, so way back when I didn't even understand what was in the social engineering toolkit and what it was doing to clone a web page, those changes I made to modify it to work on my Windows system, I talked to some developers from BDS at CodeMash 2016 back in January this year. And I spoke to Dave Kennedy there, and I mentioned that I had done this. And I was just kind of like, well, I don't know if you'd be interested in my input on set. He said, no, totally. You should put in a pull request, and I'll take a look at it. And now I point this out because it was really exciting for me because there was a tool that inspired me to do something that I was able to then contribute back in a very small way, but very able to contribute back to. And now, he was nice enough to give me a little special thanks to me for submitting that code back to the project. So that's in set now. So that was really cool for me to go, because my knowledge and my progression through learning Python was very small. I wasn't noticing a lot. It's just kind of like if you go through training courses or things like that, you don't notice big jumps in your knowledge. You're not suddenly a ninja, after a few weeks. You learn very gradually, and it feels like I'm not really doing anything. My tool still sucks. But you realize, with something like this, I look back and went, 6 months ago, I didn't even know what this code did. And then I modified it and sent it back to the original creator that presumably totally did know what it did. And he went, yeah, you made it better, cool. And was not only appreciative of it, but, actually was happy enough to put it into the code and let other people know that it had been improved upon. So that was a really cool experience for me. And that's what I want you guys to go out there and look at these tools, find a tool that you like, play with it, and you might be able to find some small way that you can make a change to it, and eventually much, much bigger ways. So then I have a second tool to talk to you about. Now this is much more recent. It's very much in development. It's actually really a kludgy mess. So if you go and look at it, I was showing some stuff to people last night, and they went, oh no, this is terrible. Like, yep, I know you're a developer and you hate this. Everything I'm doing right now is probably really offensive if you know how to code Python properly. But this is what I'm using to try a lot of things. And I call it Viper because it's like my fish in a barrel joke. This is a G.I. Joe reference. And I'll probably change the name eventually if I can think of a good one. But what I wanted to do was there was a lot of OSINT things that I did for pen tests. Looking at domains, collecting information, looking at who is info, all this stuff that I just ran through kind of on a script in my head. Okay, I need to look at, all right, I'll run this tool, I'll check this out for passive intelligence gathering. I said, well, what if there's tools like Discover Script by Lee Bairds and other tools that I'm using for this. I wonder what if I could combine some of them, or what if I could script what some of these commands that I'm running every time. What if I look into the Shodan API? Can I automate some of the lookups I'm doing on Shodan? And it turns out that I could. So I said, hey, all right, I'm using Laramie's.
Hi folks, Aaron Geek here. Unfortunately, we had another Avid Media freeze up. Sorry for the inconvenience. There's no actual audio for the rest of this particular video.